Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of 5 Facts. Today we're here to talk about the 1981 movie Roar. This is from Noel Marshall, and it's probably the most dangerous film ever filmed in Hollywood, and possibly pretty much anywhere unless you're talking about like an actual smut video. It's not just stunts, it's not just anything like that. This video is insane. So, let's get to the facts. Fact number 1, like I was saying, this is the most dangerous film that's ever been made, at least from all the films that I've looked at. And there's a very simple reason for this. There's more than 100 full-sized lions, tigers, cheetas, mountain lions, everything on the set of this movie. It's basically done at a nature preserve, and they are just everywhere. Like, you see people walking into the living room, and there's just lions. So we're going to go through some of the injuries and some of the fun things that happen on set with all that. I want to start with the fact that anytime you see lions or anything like that in modern Hollywood movies, usually there's 2 handlers for big animals. Being that there were over 100 of them on the set, you should have had an entire army of animal handlers. There was a total of 2. And this definitely led to some issues. Well, before filming even started, John Marshall, one of the producers of this film, actually ended up getting tackled, held down for a full half hour while a lion chewed on his head a little bit. This led to over 50 stitches. Tippi Hedren, whenever she was riding that elephant, ended up getting her leg stuck between the elephant tusk and the trunk and ended up fracturing her leg. She also, at one point in this movie, and all of this stuff is in the movie, by the way, like when people get injured, they're not hiding it. She gets bitten and needs 50-some stitches to the back of her head. She was talking about like how scary it is, mostly because of the insane pressure that you feel as these jaws are just clamping around you. Noel Marshall, the one who directed it, wrote, and basically starred in this, in one of the first scenes, takes a bite to the hand and it goes all the way through his hand, full-on puncture wound. He took so many different injuries in this movie because he was one of the main handlers, because he worked with these animals all the time. It was absolutely ridiculous. He actually developed gangrene because he had so many scratches, so many different things happened to him. This was John DuPont's first movie. He would go on to direct Speed and a bunch of other really cool things. And he was the cinematographer on this. There were times where he had to basically sit in a pit and have lions jumping over him. There was one moment where he actually thought that he was safe, because most of these filmings were done like inside cages behind barriers and all that. He thought he was safe, but a noise startled the lion, so it came over and literally just bit his head in the hole, causing more than 120 stitches. It honestly, like from the picture, looked like he was probably almost scalped. Melanie Griffith, who is actually Tippi Hedren's daughter, who, of course, is one of the main actors in this movie, she actually turned down working with her stepdad and her mom because she was worried that one of these tigers, lions, whatever, was going to take away, quote-unquote, half of her face. Well, it turns out that that was kind of a prescient thought, because she ended up getting clawed on the face and had to have facial reconstructive surgery to get things fixed after she took this swipe. Also, a big problem with this, it was 45 minutes to the nearest hospital. That makes a huge difference when over 70 people get hospitalized in the making of a single movie. Tippi Hedren said that more than 100 actually got hurt filming this, to the point where they needed serious injuries, stitches, and so on, but more than 70 literally had to go to the hospital. Fact number 2, the OnScreen Family was actually a real-life family. Noel Marshall had 3 children with his first wife, and ended up marrying Tippi Hedren, and Tippi Hedren had Melanie Griffith from her former marriage. So all of these children ended up being in this movie, and they as a couple were in this movie. It was something that they were kind of inspired to do after a trip to Africa. And it's just interesting that they were able to put together this and put their own children at risk the whole time, especially because there are moments where you can really see that these kids are terrified. There's a part where a lion's reaching out and trying to grab somebody from a boat, and it was the one that actually had bitten them very hard previously a few days before. So it seemed like some of these lions were remembering certain acts that these were doing. So you've got an entire family that is just putting their kids at risk for a movie that almost nobody in the world had heard of until recently. What's funny about this is before they actually did this movie, they were obsessed with big cats. They had a 400-pound lion living in their house in the Hollywood Hills. And there's actually a really cool Time magazine spread on this, where you've just got this lion like laying on the floor, like just sitting up, like laying in bed with people like it's a normal house cat. It looked like it was kind of a big baby. But still, that's a 400-pound lion inside your house. They started adding more and more, and I think by the time they got to 5 or 6 different big cats at their house, the neighbors complained and they had to start up a new ranch. So this ranch in Acton, California, called Shambhala, is where this movie would end up being filmed, and it was the family's ranch. And because of this, some people have called this the most expensive home movie ever made. Fact number 3. To really make these animals safe for filming, you have to raise them from birth. And a lot of the ones in this movie were raised from birth. The first one they got that I was talking about in the previous fact was basically picked up from a magazine article where at the end they called the number and they got an exotic cat delivered. It's kind of like what happened with with Mike Tyson whenever he ended up picking up his tigers. It's just kind of a chance thing that they stumbled on. And they just started ordering more. And after they got this ranch, they decided that they wanted to work on preservation, which it was starting to get big at the time in the 60s and 70s whenever they were writing this movie and filming it. But it wasn't as big as it is today with the idea of endangered species and preservation. So that was a big reason why they made this movie and a big reason why they made this ranch. They would take in big cats that were used as pets. There were a lot of drug lords that had them that would get arrested. Then the cat had to either be euthanized or taken by a place like this. They had unwanted circus animals. They had all sorts of things. And this was great for the animals compared to what their fate would have been. But it also made filming a little bit more sketchy because a lot of these animals were untrained. That's why they're actually given a writing credit in this movie. Because most of the time it was people reacting to what the lions were doing and trying to be safe around them that led to what was actually happening in this film. Fact number 4, lots of disasters struck this production, and it wasn't just the injuries from the lions. Part of the reason why this movie took 11 years to finish was because of natural disasters that occurred on the property. There was a massive flood in the 70s that came through. It killed a few of the lions, and a few of the lions actually did end up getting shot by the sheriff's department as well, because they were just lions out on the loose. Unfortunately, the one named Robbie, which was their lion king, was one of the ones that had to get put down by the sheriff department. This wasn't the only massive thing to befall it, but that one was probably the most costly. That cost about $4 million to fix. This entire movie was supposed to be shot for under $3 million over the course of 6 months. This is already 5 years into production whenever this happens. Later, once they got the thing fully back up, they had a brush fire that came through the hills, and they had to evacuate all the animals again. And while they were doing this, a cheetah clawed Noel Marshall to the point where he had to literally take months off from doing anything related to this project. He just got mauled while he was trying to get this cheetah out of there. After all was said and done, one of the biggest disasters was directly on their wallet. It was $17 million to get this movie made, and it couldn't even get an American distributor because of the lawsuits against them based off of their creditors. So, you're putting all that money in for something that literally can't even be sold. Fact number 5, popcorn facts. Usually I do these because it's hard to find big, meaty facts to really discuss, but there's so many cool things about this movie, I just wanted to throw a few more at you. The first one we're going to talk about is the fact that the safe word was complete bullshit. Noel Marshall said that if someone said the name Noel on the set, he would immediately stop filming and go and help them. One of the first days that Melanie Griffith was on the set, she got pinned down by a lion that started to pull her by the hair, just pulling her up from the ground. And it sounds like she's saying no, 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 but she's saying Noel because she's trying to use the safe word to get him to end the scene. And from that point on, the actors realized that there really wasn't a safe word and they were kind of out for themselves. The only actor that wasn't actually injured on this, one of the main actors, was Mativo. He was the black guy on set, and he was from Kenya, and he said in his country that you don't befriend the wildlife. And so he did what he was required in the scenes, but he didn't mess around with the cats at all. It wasn't like DuPont where he was so fascinated by the tigers, by the lions, by everything else that he was kind of paying attention to them. He just really was a very business-like attitude in and out, and that kept him from being mauled. The full inspiration for this actually came from that African trip that I was talking about earlier, where Hedren and Marshall had found a ranger station that was completely overrun by wild cats. It was just a pride of lions had moved into it. And that's why you see this big house that's just filled with dozens of lions. I think at one point there's 35 in the same room. That's a lot of lion meat. That's just so many lions. But it ends up making one of the more unique scenes I've ever seen. In order to make this movie, Hedren and Marshall had to mortgage everything they had. Hedren sold all of her jewelry. She sold the coat that she wore in Birds. She sold all these other things. They sold all their properties, and they just kept putting money into it. And it was a real labor of love, but also just like needing to get it done. And it was something that was heartbreaking because they really weren't able to get it anywhere but the international market. And they didn't know how to market it on the international market because some people called it horror, some people called it comedy, some people called it just like a suspense movie because it kind of lacked a full narrative. It was supposed to be about preservation. It was supposed to be a story about all those sorts of things. But because it was so much reacting to the animals, it was sort of a survival situation. And it didn't really have that strong of a narrative. The last little bit for Popcorn Facts is that the Roar Foundation is still around. This is headed up by Tippi Hedren, and it's a great way to donate some cash in order to help out with animals like this that are without a home, without a shelter, without anything like that. So if you want to check that out, check out the Roar Foundation. I was already getting into how strange it was, how much was put into this movie to actually make it a thing. And it's not a movie that could be made anymore. First off, like, there were no animals hurt from filming. There were some things that happened, like the flood and everything, but that wasn't as a direct result of filming. So don't worry about the lions in this. They were fine. But to put people in harm's way, I don't think you could get the insurance. I don't think you could get anything close to what was happening for this movie in modern times. It is unique and one of the most unique movies you will ever watch. I strongly recommend picking it up on Amazon, or I think people have put a full copy on YouTube. I try to support the people who make these sorts of things, but it's so fascinating seeing how all this happened and just the amount of effort that was put into it and the chaos of seeing people just launched through the air by lions and the forces that are just at will here. It's absolutely fascinating to me. Like, I've just really enjoyed this movie, despite it not being a very good movie, because it is one of the most unique that I've ever seen. So I strongly recommend you guys check out Roar. Like, it's definitely a novelty, if nothing else. So that's going to do it for 5 Facts this week. We got Poltergeist coming up next week. So we're just going to keep on rolling with these. Thank you guys for doing this. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit our Patreon up at patreon.com/humanecho. I hope you have an excellent day.